Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is the author of How to Raise an Antiracist. He is one of America's foremost historians and leading anti-racist scholars. He is a National Book Award winning and #1 New York Times bestselling author of 5 books for adults and 3 books for children. Dr. Kendi is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities and the founding director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. He is a contributing writer to The Atlantic and a CBS News racial justice contributor. He is the host of a new action podcast, Be Anti-Racist. In 2020, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He was awarded a 2021 MacArthur Fellowship, popularly known as the Genius Grant. He is the author of The Black Campus Movement, which won the W.E.B. Du Bois Prize, and Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2016. At 34 years old, Dr. Kendi was the youngest ever winner of the MBA for Nonfiction. He grew up dreaming about playing in the NBA, and ironically, he ended up joining the other NBA. Dr. Kendi also produced 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers. How to Be an Anti-Racist, an international bestseller, has been translated into several languages and made several best books of 2019 lists, and was described in the New York Times as the most courageous book to date on the problem of race in the Western mind. He's also published many academic essays in journals and op-eds in numerous periodicals, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, Salon, Time, and many more. He has commented on a series of national, international, and local media outlets like CNN, ABC, CBS, BBC, OWN, BET, and SiriusXM. A sought-after public speaker, Dr. Kendi has delivered thousands of addresses over the years at colleges, universities, bookstores, and more places. Dr. Kendi strives to be a hardcore anti-racist and a softcore vegan. Dr. Kendi is also the author of Goodnight Racism, which was also published at the same time as How to Raise an Antiracist. Dr. Kendi lives in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, Dr. Kendi. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss How to Raise an Antiracist and also Goodnight Racism.
Well, thank you for having me on.
I have to tell you, I read this book to my kids, and my daughter was like, but no one's racist. Why would, and I was like, that's so great. I was like, well, some people used to be, in the olden days, people did feel badly. And they're like, but people just have different skin tones now. And I'm like, well, like learning moment here, which you would have lots to say about. So anyway, if you were in that moment with my daughter, what would be the perfect thing for me to have said?
Well, actually, first, that's one of the beauties about books, is it not? Like, it sparks those conversations with our children. And I would have actually asked her, so what do you think it means to be racist?
I did ask her that. So she knew the definition, Yeah,
and really sort of just talk through the definition, especially if, she says that, and then start maybe providing examples of people or instances in which people may be, the definition may apply or it may not apply. Right. And, to really get her, or to get our child sort of thinking, which also is great for critical thinking, which, is great to sort of prevent prejudicial thinking.
Okay. Well, I didn't mean to start by totally putting you on the spot there. But anyway, now that we've worked our way through that, your book was not only really helpful and instructive and interesting, thought-provoking, all that good stuff, but there was so much memoir in this story. There was so much personal experience weaved throughout, which I found so compelling. And the story that you talk about with your wife and your pregnancy and her pregnancy and having to stay in the hospital for all those months, which I had twins, so I relate to the bed rest thing, no fun at all. And the fear and the NICU, like all of the things that you went through, and then how you could use every moment as an example of something else through when your daughter was born and the playgroup or daycare that she went to. I mean, everything in your life. And then your cancer, which that was horrible. I'm so sorry you had to go through that too. I mean, I feel like I went on this whole journey with you in this book, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it would be more like a nonfiction. I just didn't expect to find so much of you and your heart and soul versus your academic sort of thinking in this book. And it was just amazing. It was so, why did you do that? Tell me about it. Tell me how this whole book came to be.
Well, I think that to be anti-racist and even to raise a child to be anti-racist is not a static sort of thing. It is indeed a journey, and it's a process. It's a behavior. It is us reflecting on the times in which we made mistakes and we need to say things better or do things differently. And I wanted to sort of convey that movement, that sort of process. And I also, particularly as a parent who also studies racism and talks and engages with people all the time about being anti-racist, I wanted to talk about how this was difficult for me too. Yeah. And the difficulty and the fear that parents face is normal. Like, and it's even something that I had, but that shouldn't prevent us from having these tough conversations with our children and protecting them by teaching them about racism.
Interesting. Well, throughout the book, you gave many examples and healthcare for Black women and pregnancy and statistics related to, fetal health and all of these things, like everything related to something personal in your story. And even your brother's sort of misdiagnosis at first. I loved that story when maybe you could tell it probably better than me of when the teacher called home and said, why is your son not talking? And I guess your dad was like, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? He talks all the time. Like, what's going on? And how like learning disability and like speech impediment, all this stuff. Tell me about that moment and how that's an example, like a learning moment that you shared in the book as well.
Well, yeah, my brother, I believe when he was in fourth grade, I think 10 years old, he was not speaking that much in class. And we suspect he wasn't speaking that much in class because the teacher wasn't respecting him, was thinking that there was a problem. He potentially she was thinking that because he was Black. And what we find, according to studies, is that when young children are experiencing bigotry, it typically leads to sort of depression. It typically causes them to close up. It certainly doesn't allow them to be expressive. And so we suspect that's what was happening in that class. And for, I believe, 7.5 years, my brother had been diagnosed with having a learning disability and was going through special education classes as a result. But that teacher, we suspect, was very pivotal in that school actually trying to change his diagnosis to what's known as intellectual disability now, or what was then mental retardation, which was a more serious and stigmatizing, sort of diagnosis. And we think it was all because of their relationship, right? Because he was responding. And it just goes to show how, particularly for kids with disabilities who may not have the ability to express what's happening to them, we have to protect them too. We have to actually be even more protective, of them, because they're facing racist discrimination. And I wanted to really document how all different types of kids are facing it. So if you're a teacher who is white and you believe that, white people are naturally smart, and you have a child who indeed has a learning disability, you can't even fathom that because the child is white. So you're not going to allow that child to get to get services and help that child would need.
You had so many amazing passages in the story of your life, basically. Oh, tell me more about when your daughter started daycare and she would only play with the white doll and what that brought up with you and your wife and, all of that and how it started with you guys laughing and then she kept playing with the doll and
Yeah. So if many parents, particularly if many white parents fear their child, like one day saying something that's racist and sort of embarrassing and bringing shame to the family, then what many Black parents of Black children fear is their child sort of internalizing the idea of white superiority. And when my child was a little over 1 year old, I remember going to pick her up from daycare and she was playing with a white doll. And, I put the doll to the side and she sort of cried, but she came and we went home. The next day it was harder to get the white doll out of her hands. And each successive day that week, it got harder and harder to the point at which she had an all-out tantrum and didn't want to leave the doll and didn't even want to come home, which was different because whenever we would arrive, she'd be happy to go with us. So we were like, what's going on here? Like, is this a symbol that she is internalizing this idea of white superiority? And we didn't know. But what we found out the fifth day, which was the day that both of us came, and she loves it when both of us come to pick her up. So she actually put the doll aside and came and hugged us. We feel like we won at least one round. And after that, I actually went around to the toy chests in the daycare and saw that every doll that they had looked white. So she didn't even have another option. And I used that, in the book to talk about that for even a 1-year-old, the environment that we're raising them in, the dolls that we're choosing for them, the books that we're choosing for them, even the people that we're choosing to be around them are making a difference or could be making a difference and is shaping them to understand like who they value. And they may not even have a choice in the matter, which in that case happened to my daughter. And we should allow our children to young children to see the beauty of the human rainbow by allowing them to see us all.
Very true. So what did you end up doing? Did you get the daycare any more dolls? Or what did you do?
Oh yeah, I let them know.
Okay.
and they made a change.
Does she still go there? No, she's too old now.
She continued to go there. They made the change. I think they recognized, that was a problem.
Okay. Okay, making changes. This 6 months of chemotherapy followed by surgery that you went through and having to recover. The scene at home when you got back and you were on the couch and your daughter was so sad and crying, seeing you laying there in your robe. Tell me about that moment and how it feels to parent through pain of your own and fear for your own mortality. I mean, that you had stage 4 cancer. I mean, that's so terrifying. I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah, it was. So after the surgery, and I came home, or after not only the surgery, but also, a week in the hospital, I came home and of course I had bandages on my belly and, I'm sitting on the couch with a robe and my sort of chest open. So my daughter came and could see the bandages and she started looking at the bandages. I believe she was about 2.5 years old. And she just started, crying. And I was, of course, asking her, what's wrong. And, she wouldn't say. And eventually, I asked her, I was like, do you want some bandages like Danny? And, she stopped crying and started sniffling and said yes. And so my partner, Sadiqa, who was there, went and got her bandages and she started putting them on her sort of belly in the same place that I had mine. And really for the next few months, there was no gift she liked more than Band-Aids. And in a way we healed together. And that story I sort of shared in the context of empathy and how studies show that, at 2 years old, our kids start understanding and learning empathy. They could feel what other people are feeling. But studies show that we also have the capacity to either nurture empathy or sort of block its growth.
Mm-hmm.
And to nurture empathy is to nurture a child who can look at someone who doesn't look like them, who doesn't worship like them, who doesn't live near them. And when they see that person hurting, they hurt. That's the type of anti-racist empathy we have to nurture in our children.
Interesting. Yeah. My daughter is so sensitive that the other day she said, I sometimes I don't like to draw the number 8 because an 8 just seems sad. So I start feeling sad for the 8 and crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my God. I can't.
That is great. I mean, can you imagine if all humans were like that? I mean,
oh my gosh.
If we had that, if we felt that deeply.
Yeah. No. Imagine even if all my kids felt like that, I would never get out of the house. It's like impossible. Okay. So in the beginning, you set up your whole construct, which many people were already, I'm sure, familiar with from your other book, which everyone in the world probably has at this point, which must make you feel really good. But how it's not enough to not be racist. You have to actively be anti-racist, which is something different altogether. So for anyone who's not as familiar with this, could you just explain what the difference is? Like, take a scenario and explain, like, if you were being racist, not racist, and anti-racist in such and such a setting, like, and what you should really be doing, or what the main takeaway is for people who want to raise anti-racist children.
Well, I mean, I think the starting point of any serious conversation about race and racism should be with a racial disparity. So, Black people being disproportionately impoverished in this country. The question is why. And so some people who are going to express a racist idea to explain that disparity by saying Black people are poorer because they're lazier, they don't work as hard, there's something wrong or inferior about Black people. To take an anti-racist position is to say that the cause of that disparity between those groups, and we're not talking about individuals, but between groups, is this history and even the presence of racist policies and practices that are causing these disparities. But going back to the first person who would say, well, it's because Black people are lazy. When people point that out, the typical response that we have is, no, I'm not racist. So when somebody says, you just said a racist idea, the typical response is just to deny it. But there are times in which someone who's striving to be anti-racist expresses a racist idea, and they have a different response. And that is to think about it, reflect on it, and admit, you know what? Yes, that was a racist idea, and I'm going to change, and I'm going to be better. And that's another reason why in How to Raise an Antiracist, I wanted to really show the mistakes that I made as a parent. Even some of the mistakes that my parents made in terms of raising me, and certainly teachers, so that people can see people making mistakes and growing and developing and changing. And that's really the process of being anti-racist.
Did you see yourself as a child becoming this advocate and lightning rod, and I don't even know the right words, expert, I guess that's a better word, complete expert and changing world thinking around this topic? Like, would you have predicted that when you were 8? Like, what'd you want to be then?
No, I would not have predicted that. If it was up to me, when I was 8 years old, I would have been preparing to play with Steph Curry in the NBA Finals. I certainly, even by the time I got to college, I wasn't necessarily, thinking that this route, was for me. But I think once I really started studying just the vast amount of inequities and injustices and violence and young and old people thinking there's something wrong with them or superior about them, as opposed to the problem being more policy and structural, the more I gravitated to understanding it, to wanting to speak about it, to wanting to abolish it.
Did you find this path easy or hard to achieve? Like, because you've essentially created a niche, if you will, right? That's like, and you are also, a historian of African history, and you've written 5 bestsellers. I mean, what can you not do at this point? Did the path seem clear to you as you were going through it, or was it difficult to sort of pave the way?
It was difficult, and it remains, difficult. Even now, because I think my work has sort of broken through and is reaching everyday people of different backgrounds, different ideologies. There are people who would rather things to remain as they are. And so instead of engaging with me and engaging with the work, they distort and misrepresent the work and then attack it. And how do you respond to that? I can't respond to something I didn't say or don't believe. So that's what's been probably the hardest, part. But I also know that there's a history to this. And I, as a historian, I know that during the enslavement era, slaveholders and even Jim Crow segregation is literally legislated for ignorance. Mm-hmm. And not just ignorance of Black people, even ignorance of many white people, and to keep us divided, to keep us thinking that we're each the problem as opposed to those who are ruling us.
So this is, heavy intellectual critical thinking. What do you do to get away from this? Do you still play basketball? What do you like to do when you're not engaged in this? How do you release, let go, have fun, whatever?
So I think I've hung up my sneakers, so I don't play basketball as much anymore. But I, of course, watch sports. I watch basketball and baseball and football. I read a ton, and I think reading for me is probably the most peaceful thing that I do. I, of course, exercise, try to enjoy family and friends. And, I'm my wife, it's always interesting whenever in public light, someone sort of says that I'm so serious, because privately, she says I'm a goofball. And life is certainly a life, one where we should create joy. But it's that joy and that closeness to joy that I have that I want everyone to have, or more so, I want to ensure that no one is being blocked from that joy by the injustices of our society.
And when you read for fun, what do you like to read? What's something good you've read lately?
So I tend to read books on race or racism or American history or novels. I'm reading a book called Torn Apart by Dorothy Roberts, which is a really serious investigation of what's known as the child welfare system. And even though this system is supposed to protect children and families, Dorothy Roberts, Professor Roberts, actually finds that it's not. It's actually doing the very opposite. And she calls for a complete overhauling of it, if not elimination of it. And so it's, I'm obviously, because I'm thinking a lot about children now, those are the types of books that I'm reading.
Do you let your daughter watch TV, YouTube? Where are we on the Instagram? Where are we on the screen stuff with her?
So she watches this TV from time to time, but obviously we don't want to just sit her in front of the TV if possible. And I think that sometimes that's all we can do as parents, especially during the pandemic. But we try to move her away from that, or to have constructive things for her.
All right. I think my kids are the biggest YouTube addicts. It's embarrassing at this point. Yeah, that's what my son wants to be, a YouTuber when he grows up. He's 7. So I don't think that's a thing, but it's okay. Anyway. Okay. Well, having written so many books yourself, what advice would you give to aspiring authors?
So I would first give aspiring authors the advice that when it comes to the book idea, we have to figure out, we have to really be able to be extremely self-reflective and self-critical about the type of book that, that we, based on our talents, could produce, and that obviously the world could receive. And we can't sort of land on a book idea and then run with it, even though it may not match our writing style or expertise. And so it's just sort of making sure we're marrying who we are and our expertise with our book idea is incredibly important. And then I mean, as a nonfiction writer, especially, I do a ton of research and preparation and outlining before I ever start writing. I personally once I get to the point in which I'm writing, I want to feel as if literally that's all I'm doing. So I'm not having to think about what I'm going to write. I can just focus on the craft of writing itself. Mm-hmm. And that helps me tremendously, to actually write, but it just takes a tremendous amount of preparation. And so I would just encourage writers, if you want to go down that route, to really prepare to write. Like anything else, we have to prepare. And then finally, I think there's the process of writing the book, and then there's the process of talking about the book. And it's almost like a completely different animal.
Yes.
And necessitates different sort of muscles that we sort of have to train as, and use as writers.
Yeah. People don't necessarily warn you enough about that. Congratulations. You are now going to be a full-time marketing person. That's your job now. Go ahead. Have fun. Anyway. Well, thank you so much. I really was quite moved by your book. You're such a good writer. Your story is so powerful. Your ideas are powerful. And it was just really amazing to get a chance to chat with you and discuss all the great things you're doing. So thanks.
It's great to chat with you, and thank you for your work that you're doing. It's just an incredibly important time, and I'm so glad we have this podcast.
Thank you. If you want to talk sports, though, you have to call my husband. But yeah, we have something on every night. I was literally just saying to him last night, I was like, it must be so nice that you can organize your whole life around what game is on and that there's always something. And he's like, I almost didn't find something tonight. But then finally I went to this channel and there was this game on. I was like, oh, phew. I'm so relieved for you. So anyway. All right. Well, take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.